Dictators fall, we don't get to rewrite history just because it's politically convenient. I'm Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, and I need to talk to you about what's happening right now with Nicolas Maduro, Donald Trump, and the dangerous game being played with American foreign policy and the truth. Because here's what they're not telling you on Fox News. Here's what they're conveniently leaving out of those press conferences. Here's what they hope you won't remember when they're busy taking victory laps and slapping each other on the back. Donald Trump didn't capture Nicolas Maduro. Let me say that again for the people in the back. Donald Trump did not capture Nicolas Maduro. The United States military, operating under procedures and protocols that were established long before Trump took his second oath of office, working with intelligence communities and international partners, executed an operation that was years in the making. But somehow, some way, we're supposed to believe that the man who couldn't even secure a peaceful transfer of power on January 6th is now the mastermind behind international law enforcement operations. Give me a break. I'm a lawyer. I was a public defender before I came to Congress. And one thing I learned in that courtroom, one thing I learned facing down prosecutors and judges and a system that wasn't always fair, is that facts matter. Evidence matters, the truth matters, and right now what we're seeing is a coordinated effort to distort the truth for political gain. So let's talk about Nicolas Maduro. Let's talk about what this man actually represents, because this isn't just about one dictator. This is about what America stands for, what we're willing to tolerate, and what we're willing to lie about when it serves our political interests. Nicolas Maduro has been terrorizing the Venezuelan people for over a decade. Let that sink in. Over a decade of systematic oppression, economic devastation, humanitarian crisis, and the complete dismantling of democratic institutions. We're talking about a man who has overseen the exodus of over 7 million Venezuelans, 7 million people forced to flee their homes, their country, their families. That's not a statistic. Those are 7 million human beings with names, with dreams, with children who deserve better. This is a man who has imprisoned political opponents, journalists, and activists, a man who has rigged elections so blatantly that even international observers couldn't ignore it, a man who has presided over an economy so destroyed that people are literally starving in a country that sits on some of the largest oil reserves in the world. Think about that. One of the richest countries in natural resources, reduced to poverty and desperation because of corruption and authoritarianism. So yes, Maduro needed to be held accountable, absolutely, without question. But let's be very clear about who did the work and who's trying to take the credit. The efforts to bring Maduro to justice didn't start in January 2025. They started years ago. They started with career prosecutors in the Department of Justice who built cases brick by brick. They started with intelligence officers who spent countless hours gathering evidence, tracking movements, building relationships with international partners. They started with diplomats who worked behind the scenes to coordinate with other nations, to build consensus, to ensure that when the time came, the international community would support this action. And yes, they started under previous administrations, both Democratic and Republican.
This is what would happen to your body if you...
Competent governance looks like. This is what it means to actually work on behalf of American interests and human rights, not just talk about them when it's convenient. But now, Donald Trump wants to stand in front of cameras and act like he personally flew down to Caracas and slapped handcuffs on Maduro himself. And his supporters are eating it up. They're creating memes, they're writing headlines, they're spinning a narrative that is fundamentally disconnected from reality. And I'm not going to let that slide, not on my watch, because this is bigger than Trump's ego. This is bigger than his desperate need for a win after the chaos of his first term and the constitutional crisis he created. This is about the American people's right to know the truth. This is about protecting the integrity of our institutions. This is about making sure that we don't normalize the idea that presidents can just lie with impunity.
Governments. But here's what really exposes how corrupt this system has become. The same defense contractors and oil companies that benefit from Venezuelan regime change are the same donors who fund political campaigns and lobby for military interventions that serve their business interests. Lockheed Martin, which received $18.2 billion in weapons contracts for the Ukrainian war, will receive additional billions for Venezuelan occupation and reconstruction contracts. Raytheon, which got $14.7 billion for Ukrainian military aid, will profit from Venezuelan military operations and arms sales to whatever puppet government Trump installs. ExxonMobil, Chevron, and ConocoPhillips, companies that lost assets when Venezuela nationalized its oil industry, will regain access to Venezuelan petroleum resources through regime change that serves their shareholders instead of American citizens. The Venezuelan invasion isn't national security policy. It's corporate welfare implemented through military force and funded by taxpayers who get no benefit from policies that enrich multinational corporations. Meanwhile, the constitutional principles that should prevent this corruption are being violated by the same president who campaigned against the swamp, but now uses military power to serve swamp interests while bypassing democratic constraints on executive authority. Here's how the international legal framework makes Trump's Venezuelan invasion a war crime that violates treaties the United States has signed and international laws we expect other countries to follow. The United Nations Charter prohibits military aggression against sovereign nations except in cases of self-defense or Security Council authorization. Venezuela has not attacked the United States, and the UN Security Council has not authorized military action against Venezuela. The Geneva Conventions require that military force target legitimate military objectives and minimize civilian casualties during armed conflicts. Trump's bombing raids targeted civilian infrastructure and government buildings in populated areas without regard for international humanitarian law. The International Criminal Court has jurisdiction over war crimes committed by nationals of member states, and the forcible removal of heads of state through military invasion constitutes aggravated kidnapping under international law. Trump just committed war crimes that would justify international prosecution if committed by leaders of countries that America considers enemies or rivals. But here's the double standard. When Russia captures Ukrainian officials, America calls it war crimes. When China threatens Taiwan, America calls it aggression. When Iran conducts military operations in neighboring countries, America imposes sanctions. When Trump invades Venezuela and kidnaps their president, American officials call it successful national security policy. This isn't principled foreign policy, it's might makes right imperialism that destroys American credibility while violating the international laws we expect other countries to respect. Meanwhile, countries around the world are watching America abandon constitutional government and international law in favor of military dictatorship that serves corporate interests instead of democratic principles.
Stark contrast to our established legal norms, reinforcing the belief that might is right and undermining diplomacy. History has repeatedly demonstrated that military invasions against sovereign states yield only instability and deepen crises.
The President of the United States of America during the afternoon of 3rd January 2026, in which he not only threatened with additional airstrikes against the Venezuelan territory, but also claimed to resolve to occupy and govern the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela and to exploit the natural resources and administer the wealth of that sisterly nation in what can only be described as the confession of a clear plan of annexation.
Mr. President, we wish to, due to the shortcomings of its predecessor, the League of Nations, the UN was created to prevent countries from resorting to conflict, to settle disputes and prohibit the use of force unless it is done in a legally prescribed manner. In doing so, the UN has played a pivotal role in ensuring peaceful existence amongst nations, including in ending the colonial subjugation by powerful countries over others, underpinned by respect for the equal rights of nations, large and small, and respect for the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples. Joining the organization and committing to its principles afforded protection to many of us, with the supposed assurance that no longer would one nation be seen as inferior to another.